May 1940. Europe was burning. In less than a month, Hitler's armies had done what the Great War had failed to achieve in 4 years. Belgium and the Netherlands were crushed. The once mighty Maginot Line had been outflanked through the thick forests of the Ardennes. Terrain the French generals had believed impassable to tanks. They were wrong. Columns of panzers rolled forward with relentless precision, slicing through the French countryside like lightning. Towns that had slept for centuries woke to the thunder of engines and the scream of dive bombers. The roads filled with refugees, farmers with carts piled high with furniture, families on bicycles, old men leading cows through the smoke of burning fields. The Luftwaffe struck without mercy. Convoys of civilians were machine-gunned from the air, their possessions scattered like leaves in the wind. Whole villages vanished overnight. The German advance was so swift that even seasoned officers struggled to grasp the scale of collapse. As Paris prepared its defenses, fear crept into every heart. Bridges were wired for demolition, sandbags piled around monuments, and barricades hastily built along boulevards. Yet everyone knew it was futile. The road to Paris, La Route de Paris, was no longer a defense line. It had become a countdown. Inside French headquarters, chaos replaced order. Radio operators lost contact with entire divisions. Reports contradicted one another, some units retreating, others surrendering. Generals argued over outdated maps, pointing to positions that no longer existed. The front was dissolving faster than they could redraw it. General Maurice Gamelin, France's aging commander-in-chief, sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by exhaustion and disbelief. He had prepared for a war of trenches, not of speed. Blitzkrieg, the German lightning war, was a concept he neither understood nor could counter. In London, Churchill pleaded for coordination, sending cables across the channel. "Hold on! Reinforcements are coming," but words could not stop the armored spearheads. Each day, the Wehrmacht advanced 20 miles deeper into French soil. Airfields fell silent. Supply lines collapsed. Even the government began to fracture under the pressure of panic. On June 5th, the French High Command faced a truth it had long feared. Paris could not be defended. The order was given to evacuate key ministries and archives. Soldiers still marched, but with hollow eyes. The dream of holding the line had died, replaced by one grim reality: survival. The fall of France became a human flood. Millions of civilians fled southward in what history would call the Great Exodus of 1940. Entire towns moved at once. Teachers, farmers, nurses, priests, a nation on the road. The highways were jammed with endless lines of carts, cars, horses, and people on foot. Babies cried in the heat, dogs barked, and church bells rang for no one. Above them, German planes prowled. Each attack scattered the columns into ditches and fields. Suitcases burst open. The roads were littered with photographs, bread, and broken toys. Some families carried their entire lives in wheelbarrows. Others had nothing but the clothes on their backs. One witness wrote, "The road was alive, then dead, then alive again." Every sound meant fear. Hospitals emptied. Trains derailed under bombardment. The French countryside, once peaceful, had become a moving sea of suffering. In that chaos, the sense of France as a nation began to dissolve. No one knew who commanded or who still fought. The only certainty was that the enemy was coming, and faster than anyone could flee. Paris, the jewel of Europe, stood on the edge of oblivion. By early June, the French government declared the capital an open city. It would not resist, to spare it from destruction. The army withdrew, and the streets filled with silence. The city that once glowed with art, laughter, and music was now cloaked in dread. The Louvre's masterpieces had already been evacuated in secret convoys, hidden in castles and barns across the countryside. The Eiffel Tower was closed, its elevators disabled. The Seine flowed quietly beneath empty bridges. The cafés of Montmartre, once alive with poets and painters, now sat deserted, chairs overturned, glasses half full. At dusk, blackout curtains sealed every window. The boulevards went dark for the first time in living memory. Children whispered of German soldiers and tanks, while their parents stared at the horizon, listening for engines in the night. For centuries, Paris had been a symbol of civilization. Now, it was a city waiting for conquest. The lights that had inspired the world were gone, replaced by the long, trembling shadow of war. June 14th, 1940. The morning was still when the first German motorcycle units entered Paris. They crossed the Seine unopposed. Soldiers marched past Notre Dame, their boots echoing against cobblestones that had once heard the laughter of a free people. Within hours, swastikas hung from the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. There was no battle, no gunfire, only silence. From shuttered windows, Parisians watched their city become a stage for the enemy's triumph. Some wept quietly, others turned away. A few dared to stand in the streets, defiantly unmoving as tanks rolled by. In Berlin, Hitler celebrated. For him, this was revenge for 1918, a symbol of German supremacy. For France, it was humiliation beyond words. That same evening, on the Champs-Élysées, German officers drank wine at the same cafes the French had abandoned days before. A city that had defined art, beauty, and reason now lay beneath the boots of tyranny. And across the Channel, Churchill watched the news unfold and understood. Britain now stood alone. When the marching boots faded, Paris fell into an eerie calm. German patrols moved through the boulevards like ghosts, disciplined, efficient, unstoppable. The swastika fluttered above government buildings. Loudspeakers broadcast orders in clipped German, curfews, rationing, obedience. The people of Paris lived between fear and pride. Some tried to go on as before, opening bakeries, sweeping doorsteps, pretending life was still theirs. Others could not bear to leave their homes. The sound of German motorcycles became the new heartbeat of the city. Cafes reopened under occupation. French waiters served German officers with forced smiles. Newspapers, printed in both languages, their headlines censored and rewritten. Yet, in the whispers of back rooms and behind drawn curtains, the first sparks of resistance flickered. The occupation did not bring peace. It brought humiliation. The city of art and intellect had become a trophy. A silent museum of conquest. But beneath that silence, something was beginning to stir. It began with whispers. Leaflets slipped under doors, messages scrawled in chalk on walls. Vive la France. In the dark corners of cafes and bookstores, students and soldiers without armies gathered in secret. They traded rumors, news, and hope. Among them were journalists, teachers, priests, ordinary people who refused to accept defeat. They forged networks across the city using false names and coded phrases. Radios hidden in cellars broadcast voices from London, from General de Gaulle, calling for unity and defiance. The German authorities dismissed it as noise, but noise can grow. Sabotage followed. A rail line cut, a telephone exchange destroyed. For every small victory, the cost was terrible. Arrests, executions, torture. Yet for every man or woman lost, another took their place. By autumn 1940, the resistance had no leader, no uniform, only purpose. France had fallen, but her spirit had begun to rise again. While Paris slept under occupation, another France was born, a broken mirror of the old. In the spa town of Vichy, Marshal Philippe Pétain, hero of the Great War, took power. He promised order and renewal, but his new government bowed to Berlin's will. France was divided in two, the occupied north and the so-called free zone in the south. Pétain spoke of honor and tradition, yet his rule meant collaboration. Anti-Jewish laws were enacted, political enemies were arrested. French police carried out German orders. The tricolor still flew, but it had lost its meaning. In Paris, propaganda posters appeared. Travail, famille, patrie, work, family, fatherland. But few believed the slogans. Hunger grew. Black markets thrived. Those who had once fought for liberty now fought simply to survive. Across the Channel, de Gaulle's Free France began to grow. Soldiers, sailors, and exiles who refused to kneel. While Vichy obeyed, London resisted. The soul of France was being fought for, not on battlefields, but in the hearts of her people. To the German High Command, Paris was the prize of Europe. Unlike Warsaw or Rotterdam, it would not be destroyed. It would be enjoyed. Officers strolled through the Tuileries, drank champagne in Montmartre, and sent postcards home describing the most beautiful city in the world. Luxury returned for the conquerors. Fashion houses reopened to cater to German wives. Theaters played operas approved by Berlin. Even Picasso, watched by Gestapo eyes, continued to paint, silent and defiant. But beneath the elegance, the rot was spreading. French collaborators prospered. Informants were rewarded. Jews were rounded up quietly, deported under the pretense of relocation. The Germans smiled for the cameras, but Paris was bleeding behind the lens. It was a strange occupation, half charm, half terror. The city that had defined romance was now a stage set for tyranny. And yet, every act of normality became an act of quiet resistance. To live, to endure, to remember. By 1941, fear ruled Paris more completely than any army. The Gestapo had taken over the Hotel Lutetia, once a grand hotel, now a place of screams behind closed doors. Names disappeared from apartment lists. Neighbors vanished overnight. No one asked why. The resistance was growing, but so was the price of defiance. A single pamphlet could mean a death sentence. The metro became a world of whispers. Secret messages passed in folded newspapers, coded glances across crowded cars. Every step on a cobblestone could echo too loudly. Children learned to be silent. Artists painted in secret. Priests hid those who were hunted. Even in fear, humanity refused to die. In the cafes, Germans still laughed over coffee. In the streets, Parisians walked with bowed heads. But behind those eyes burned a quiet vow. This would not last forever. France was waiting for a signal, a spark, a liberation that had not yet come. By 1942, the city that once feasted now starved. The markets were empty. Cafes served acorn coffee and bread made of sawdust. Queues stretched around blocks for a single loaf. Meat became a rumor, butter a luxury. The black market thrived in whispers and dark alleys, where fortune favored the ruthless. Children scavenged for scraps near German mess halls. Mothers traded jewelry for potatoes. Even the Seine seemed to flow slower, heavy with ash and exhaustion. Paris had become a city of hunger and silence. And yet, beneath the despair, kindness endured. Neighbors shared what little they had. Musicians played in courtyards to lift spirits. Priests offered blessings instead of bread. The occupiers controlled food, fuel, and fear, but not compassion. At night, faint strains of La Marseillaise drifted through the dark. It was forbidden, but sung anyway, quietly, with trembling lips. In that defiance, Paris reminded itself that the human spirit cannot be rationed. By late 1942, the illusion of stability began to crumble. The Germans, stretched thin by the war in the East, demanded more from France, more workers, more steel, more obedience. Pétain's government obliged, sending Frenchmen to factories in Germany under the service du travail obligatoire. For many, it was the final betrayal. The resistance grew bolder. Railway lines exploded. Posters of Pétain were defaced overnight. Underground newspapers spread stories of Allied victories, of hope returning. The Gestapo responded with fury, arrests, raids, deportations. But the fear no longer worked as it once had. From Marseille to Paris, the idea of liberation was no longer a dream. It was a plan. In the capital, secret cells united under a new name, Les Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, the French forces of the interior. They gathered weapons, trained in forests, and waited for the signal from across the sea. The wall of tyranny was beginning to crack. And through it, light began to seep. June 1944. Rumors swept through Paris like wildfire. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The invasion of France had begun. For weeks, the city buzzed with anticipation and fear. The Germans reinforced checkpoints, executed prisoners, and dug in for what they called the last stand. But beneath their boots, France was already rising. Messages flashed across hidden radios. The hour has come. Resistance fighters cut telephone lines, derailed trains, and ambushed convoys. Ordinary citizens joined. Teachers, bakers, students. Even the walls spoke, covered in graffiti. Vive de Gaulle! À bas les Boches! As the sound of Allied artillery grew nearer, the people of Paris prepared for their own war. Not with armies, but with courage. The whisper of liberation became a roar. August 19th, 1944. After 4 years of silence, Paris erupted. The resistance seized police stations and barricaded streets. Workers went on strike. The red, white, and blue flag, banned since 1940, fluttered again over the Hôtel de Ville. Bells rang from every tower. Gunfire answered them in kind. German tanks rolled through narrow streets, firing into crowds. Snipers traded shots from rooftops. The city was a battleground once more. But this time, the fight was for freedom. De Gaulle, now leading Free France, ordered the Allies to advance on the capital. The Americans hesitated. Paris was not part of their plan, but the French insisted, "We fight for our soul." After 5 days of chaos, on August 25th, 1944, the 2nd French Armored Division entered the city. Crowds poured into the streets, cheering, weeping, embracing. The nightmare was over. Paris was free. As dawn rose over the Seine on August 26th, the bells of Notre Dame rang for the first time in 4 years. De Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées through crowds of millions. There were tears, flowers, laughter, and silence, too, for those who would never see this day. The occupation had ended, but the scars would last. Families broken, homes gone. Friends vanished into the darkness of camps that would only later be revealed. Yet, in the midst of grief, pride returned. Paris had survived. Battered, but unbroken. Photographers captured faces smiling through tears. The same streets that once echoed with German boots now sang with liberation. And though the war was not yet over, France had reclaimed its heart. In the ashes of defeat, Paris had found redemption. The city of light had fallen and risen again.